Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes. And before we jump into things, I want to give a quick shout out to our episode sponsor, Vanta. Do you know the status of your compliance controls right now? Like right now? We know the real-time visibility is critical for security when it comes to GRC programs, but we rely on point-in-time checks. But get this, more than 8,000 companies like Atlassian and Quora have continuous visibility in their controls with Vanta. Here's the gist. Vanta brings automation to evidence collection across 30 frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27701. They also centralize key workflows like policies, access reviews, and reporting and help you get security questionnaires done 5 times faster with AI. Now that's a great new way to do GRC. Learn more at vanta.com/RC. That's VANTA.com/RC to learn more. And today I'm joined by Heidi Trost. Heidi, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. I've been following your content, around human-centered security, and I was like, this is a topic that doesn't get discussed enough, especially if you've been doing cybersecurity for some time. There's so much focus on, the technical stuff, right? The new technologies, the buzz, the hype, but it always comes back to humans, and not necessarily in the sense of, being the weakest link, as we hear, like insider threat, but like the actual human, people we interact with within an organization, or people that use the products we make and so on. But for folks that haven't been following you for a little bit, like me, and aren't familiar with your background, can you tell us a little bit about your background in cyber?
Sure. So I started out as a UX designer, a UX researcher, and I started going down the rabbit hole of cybersecurity. Probably resonates with a lot of folks. I was sick of hearing people, get hacked or have their identity stolen. And I thought to myself, like, what is it that I could do to help this problem? And as I looked deeper and deeper, I realized, wow, like a lot of these things are user experience issues. They're human issues. They're things that human-centered design can solve for. So once I realized, oh, I can actually help, that is when I started down the rabbit hole of cybersecurity, and I never came back out. So here I am, a recovering UX person who's, really into security. And I like to think of myself as someone who kind of speaks multiple security dialects. So I see it from a lot of different angles. I've worked at SecureWorks, which is an XDR platform. So I was designing security software for security analysts, for security practitioners. So again, I kind of see things from a lot of different angles. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
Very cool. And you also, authored a book on this topic, which we'll get into here in a moment. And I'll also be sharing a note for listeners with a discount for the book. But I'm, curious, when you say human-centered security, like, how do you define that? What do you think that means from your perspective?
Yeah, so I take human-centered design, which, by the way, has an ISO standard for the security folks out there. So you can reference that. But basically what it means is it's a user-centered process, right? So we're involving the user as part of the design process. It is cross-disciplinary, right? So it's involving multiple disciplines. It's iterative, and it focuses on systems thinking. So that's what human-centered design is. And probably a lot of those words resonate with like what human-centered security should be. So in my book, I talk about why it's so important to have that cross-disciplinary collaboration in human-centered security, why it's so important to understand the user, and why it's so important to think about the entire cybersecurity ecosystem. We all know it's very complicated. And I can go into that a little bit if you want, but I just want to kind of keep this succinct. That's what human-centered design is. Applied to security, it's very similar. But maybe the key difference is when you're thinking about that system, now you have the introduction of threat actors.
Yeah, I like that framing. And, I've been in cyber a couple of decades myself. And I feel like when we think about user-centered design, human-centered design, from the product perspective or, in the career field in general, security doesn't really stop to think about that. Like we're always focused on the controls or technical aspects of the architecture and data flows and this and that, but we don't stop and think like, about the user. And in my experience, often like not doing that leads to like poor user experiences or where we actually kind of help proliferate shadow IT. People work around us. They don't want to engage with us. They don't want to use the systems that we're working with or advocating for because they're painful to use. And, it just actually creates more risk than it mitigates in many cases of us not stopping to consider this. Why do you think in cyber, like we haven't really stopped to think about the user, but the human-centered design aspect within the organizations that we work in?
I think it's probably because humans are messy. It's a lot easier to try to fix things from a technical point of view than to try to understand human behavior, understand why people do the things that they do. And like I said before, it's a complicated ecosystem. To really fundamentally understand the system and then, spend the time to iterate, it takes a lot. Like it's a big problem to solve for. And I'll explain what I mean by the complicated ecosystem. So for me, I kind of see three key players. I see like Alice, your user. So in my book, I give my player's name. So Alice is the user. Charlie is the system design. And the reason that I personified the design of the system is you can kind of see that dynamic between like Alice and Charlie. So Charlie, is a pop-up or a warning or a communication that Alice receives, and he's constantly annoying Alice, and he's constantly using words that she doesn't understand. And he's appearing at like the worst moments in Alice's day when she's trying to get something done. So that's why I like to personify them, because it really is a dynamic, and it kind of helps you understand, what Alice might be feeling, thinking, doing, as Charlie pops up throughout her day. And then you have the threat actor, right? Like that's the third player in this scenario. And they kind of all ping pong against each other. The design of the system impacts what Alice does. Then the threat actor reacts. Then the system design is changed because the threat actor did something. Then Alice reacts in a different way. So it's just this back and forth, and it's often difficult to anticipate. And then again, like if you think of those three players like within a circle themselves, that's the larger ecosystem. So you have geopolitical pressures, you have different laws that are enacted, and different technology, right? And different things that are happening. So all of those things also influence the three players within the ecosystem. So just to illustrate, just how complicated this is and why it's so important to understand the whole thing to really have that systems thinking mindset.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I ordered a copy of the book myself. I'm looking forward to getting it. It should be arriving soon. And, I like that you took this kind of persona based approach to writing it, because I feel like it makes it more applicable to us. We feel like, oh yeah, I've been in that situation, or I've been Charlie, like I've been these people. And
exactly.
It resonates.
I've been Charlie. Gosh darn it, I've been Charlie.
Yeah, it resonates with you. And I think there's other folks like George Finney has a book on zero trust that takes a similar approach. And I think it's a really good way to write a book. You talk about, you're also emphasizing like the need for this cross-disciplinary engagement and effort around human-centered security. Why do you think that's so critical when we think about this?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give you another visual. I as a UX person, I just think in visuals. So hopefully this is helpful to folks. So think of like a Venn diagram, right? And you have a circle for each team. So you have the UX team, you have the security team, you have the legal and privacy team, you have the engineering team, product team, and so on and so forth. The UX team understands the users. The engineering team understands what might be technically possible. The security team understands the cybersecurity risks and those specific risks to your product or to your organization. The legal and privacy team understands the laws and that ever-changing landscape. Now, if all of those circles are separate, and they don't overlap, then you can't improve the security user experience, right? You can't apply those human-centered design principles. What we're looking for is for all of those circles to converge and overlap in some way. And where they overlap is where you have that knowledge, that complete knowledge, that complete picture of the ecosystem and all of those different pressures. And that is where kind of the magic happens, right? And you can improve the user experience. So that's why I think it's so important to have that cross-disciplinary collaboration. In silo, we have pieces of the information, but we don't have the complete picture. And without that complete picture, we cannot improve the security user experience.
Yeah, you know what's funny when you use the phrase like silo and cross interdisciplinary kind of collaboration, it reminds me of DevSecOps, and the reason that came about is
Mm,
because, or DevOps before it, right?
yeah,
Development and operations
yeah.
wasn't collaborating, or no development, security and operations wasn't collaborating. But in that, there's been no conversation around UX, HCD, that kind of thing. So
We're
I think it's
used to being
definitely a gap.
pushed into the corner.
Yeah, but you know what? You know what's funny though is it's so critical. Like especially as we see trends, like both on the product vendor side. Like if I make a product, some of the companies that do the best in cybersecurity make the product that has the best user experience, right? That people enjoy
Yes, I've
using
been
it.
hearing people write about this. It's very exciting. It's like, whoa, where have you all been?
Yeah, exactly. And then not only that, but there's, on the non-vendor side, a lot of organizations are, moving forward on things like platform engineering or setting up these internal platforms, right, for development teams and things like that. That
Yep,
again, and I've been a part of those in large enterprises. Again, it comes back to, do developers want to actually use this? What's the experience like for people that are using this platform?
yep.
And that can really impact adoption for some of these large enterprise initiatives too. So definitely, it reminded me of the DevOps and DevSecOps, and how there's been a gap around human-centered security in that context, or UX. I wanted to ask you too. How can teams start leveraging activities that they've done historically, like things like threat modeling, for example, when they look to better anticipate like what people will or won't do from like a threat actor perspective, for example?
Yes. I'm going to answer that question in just a second, but I just wanted to reply to one of the things that you just mentioned. Human-centered security can apply to multiple different kind of dimensions of the user experience. So I talk a lot about probably what you would think of like as the consumer user experience, right? Like, Alice signs into Gmail and, receives a message and she's not sure, if she should maybe something about her account and she's not sure if this is legitimate or not. She's not sure what to do. She doesn't know the steps to take to regain access to an account. So that's one aspect of it. But as you were describing, there's also like the security user experience for technical users or for security practitioners, right? Like they're users too, and they also make mistakes, and they, also are under a ton of pressure, especially like security analysts who I know, a lot about. Like they're under intense time pressures. So let's make their lives easier so they can protect the rest of us. And then there's also the like employee experience, right? Like the internally at organizations, improving the user experience for those people so that they can help keep their organizations safe, and designing those systems that promote those safer behaviors. So I just wanted to mention that like there's a lot of different dimensions to this, but it's all part of the security user experience. So I'll push that aside and then actually get to your question of what can we do. So one of the things that your audience may be familiar with is threat modeling, right? So I actually mentioned Adam Shostak in my book, and he wrote the foreword. So his threat modeling framework asks 4 questions. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? Did we do a good job? So first, really getting clear on, what are we working on? There are different aspects of the security user experience that kind of, bubble to the surface, right? Like there's a lot, if you like think of a horizontal line, like a timeline, and there's all this stuff kind of happening below the surface, like all those zeros and ones, all those bits and bytes. Those are things that Alice, your user, is never aware of, right? Like it never actually surfaces. It's just happening behind the scenes. But you can imagine like when, Alice encounters that security warning or that pop-up where she has to make a security decision. Those are things that bubble to the surface, right? Go above that horizontal line, and that's the security user experience. So thinking about when those moments happen, that's what are we working on, right? So that's answering Adam's first question. Sorry, my notes disappeared and I'm trying to get back to them. So there are different, in my book, I talk about different parts of the user journey that you can focus on. So one part, and I think it kind of covers a lot of different areas. So I'm going to use this as an example. So think about when someone is signing up and then setting up your product for the very first time, right? Like they're configuring it for the first time. Think about all the different things all the different choices that they have to make. as part of that onboarding process, as part of that configuration process. A lot of those are security and privacy choices that they're going to make one time, and they're probably never going to go back and change again, right? So this is a really critical moment in the security user experience, again, where things bubble to the surface and impact the user, that you could potentially focus on. And then you start asking questions around like, what could go wrong, right? Like, does Alice know how to set up the product in the most secure way possible? Does she understand the different choices that she has? Might she ask, can I go back and change this later? Where would I go? So if you start to ask those types of questions, like, is she even aware of what these options are in the first place? Does she understand the differences between the different options? Might she make a mistake along the way because she doesn't understand what the different choices are? Once you start to unpack those things and start to ask those different questions, then you can start to think about, how can we solve for these things? Can we guide Alice along that safer path? Can we be more clear on what these choices are? Oh, if we're anticipating she might not know the difference, or she might make a mistake, or like they're so similar and we really don't want her to pick the wrong one because that could potentially be something really bad for Alice, then let's try to differentiate between those two and help her make sure that she really, really understands the choice that she's making. So I'll pause there and kind of get your reaction. But those are the types of things you're asking.
Yeah, that's very important because oftentimes like, oh, it's the user, right? They're the weakest link. They're always the weakest link. It's they did something stupid, and this is actually something that Jen Easterly, I think, has been talking about in some of her recent talks. Is like making it easy to do the right thing, right?
Yes.
If we always blame the user, but then you go use some of these tools, procs, platforms, et cetera, services, and it's like it's not very intuitive in many cases. And it's like, who the hell designed this thing? Because it's very easy to make the wrong decision, and we do it often in our career field, even with years of technical expertise and experience in cybersecurity. It's still easy for us to do the wrong thing. So how could you possibly blame a user who their primary function and focus is not cybersecurity? So I think stopping to ask those kind of questions is really critical for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And really thinking about there are ways to design. Once you start asking those questions and you start to anticipate like what could potentially go wrong in this particular scenario, then you can start asking, how might we, right? Like I really like how might we statements. How might we, tackle this problem? So you start to get really focused on like what the problem actually is. It's usually a problem with the system, right? And you kind of step away from, well, one of the things that kind of really annoys me about the cybersecurity industry, and you said it at the very beginning, when we focus on like people are the weakest link, humans are the weakest link, human error, right? Like those types of things, that unfortunately, I think it kind of gives you a free pass into just blaming the user as opposed to looking at the system and being like, how can we actually design the system in a way that encourages safer behavior? How can we design the system in a way that this negative thing just can't possibly happen, right? Like we're just making it safer for our users. But the system designers are in a unique position and hold, I think Jenna Easterly has said this too, there's a lot of responsibility because you as the designers of the system, these cross-disciplinary UX allies, right? You know more about the security aspects of your product than your user ever will. So that's why it is up to you, right, to design the system in a safer way.
Yeah, I think I'm actually like as you're talking, I'm thinking about kind of this latest push we've seen in the last couple of years around secure by design, secure by default. And as you talked about, we often know more about security than the user ever will. And truly, in many cases, we could be making these things opaque to them. They don't even need to know all the technical details. It's like, how is the system designed to make it easy for them to do the right thing and the secure thing, rather than overcomplicating it or being very confusing to them and creating a lot of scenarios where they do the wrong thing, right? And then we blame them. And you could even eliminate maybe even entire classes of risks or vulnerabilities by the way you design the system, thinking about it from the user's perspective. So this is a really critical topic that I think is overlooked so much. So here you are with this book, Human-Centered Security, which I'll be sharing a link to in the show notes, as well as a discount for folks that want to check it out. What made you write the book, and what's next on the horizon for you?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people ask me, why are you so interested in security? And usually it's like, why would you be so interested in something that's so boring? But thankfully, I'm talking to a fellow cybersecurity person, so you totally understand why this field is so amazing. But the reason that I wrote the book is that, so as a user researcher, I observe patterns in human behavior. So I observe people using different products, and throughout the course of the research that I had done, I encountered a lot of questions from my research participants who were like, how do you actually do this? And it would be something related to security, or what does this message mean? Or can I trust this? And once they started to understand that I was sort of tech savvy and security savvy, they would come to me with these questions. I would also have the opportunity to observe security behaviors that I like in the wild, right? Like people weren't even aware that these things were happening. So I would see them kind of like swat away different, security pop-ups or messages. And I was like, oh, wow. So I got kind of like a front seat look into, behaviors. And then I also, as I said, I got questions asked of me, and I felt pretty stupid because I didn't know the answers to them. And like, I can Google, with the best of them and try to find the answers to these questions. But gosh, people, like, it's really tough. It's really tough to know the answers to, these different security and privacy related questions, and especially to explain them in a really succinct way. So once I felt like I was a little bit out of my league, I started to look for different resources, and I found things, like I found books to read and I found different YouTube videos, but I didn't feel like they were helping me improve the security user experience. There's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of I wanted something that was more foundational and would really help me as a product person understand security fundamentals as it applied to the security user experience. And because I could not find that anywhere, I decided, well, I might as well document some of the research that I'm doing. And then I have the Human-Centered Security podcast too, where I was interviewing different people. And I figured I might as well try to put all of this together and then share it and hope that it resonates with other people. So that's
Yes.
really what I read the book.
It's funny. I've done the same, around software supply chain security. I had published a book a couple of years ago now about that topic. And it was only because I got so interested and I was reading about it and I was looking for resources. I'm like, well, there's kind of a gap, so I ended up just kind of starting to write on the topic, and similar process. And that's awesome. So folks, that want to learn more, where can they get the book? Where can they find you? Where will you be? Any kind of conferences or speaking engagements, anything like that coming up, and so on?
Yeah, I have a few different things in the works. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I will definitely post where I'm doing podcasts, where I'm doing different talks, especially going into the first quarter of the new year. There'll be lots of different things kind of materializing. If you want to buy the book, it's at rosenfeldmedia.com. And you'll link to it in the show notes. But I have a special offer for listeners. So there's 15% off. There's a code that will be in the show notes. It's Resilient Cyber 2024. And that code will be valid for about a month until January 12th. So you can buy the book on rosenfeldmedia.com. You can also buy it on Amazon. If there are places that you want to buy it that you can't find it, let me know and I'll talk to my publisher about it.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I think this is a really fascinating topic. Like I said, it doesn't get enough attention. And when we step back and think about it, it's so important, right? I think this is something that we need to spend more time thinking about, from the user's perspective within cybersecurity. And I have no doubt the book is going to resonate with many folks. So Heidi, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks to everyone who tuned in as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving this, giving me an audience to talk about this stuff and for being interested in it. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Take care.